Hey, it's TDA, and today I wanted to set myself a challenge. If you've been following my previous Builderment content so far, you'll know I'm pretty organized, we have a decent looking facility, and I've tapped into a lot of the resources on the map already. However, there is a problem. I am about to unlock the extractor upgrade tier 4, which means that pretty much every single belt I have will either be overflowing if I upgrade all my extractors, or I would need to completely redo all my belts, and I don't really want to do that, at least not with my existing factory. So I figured, why not delete the entire factory that I currently have, make sure we make use of all the upgrades that we have available to make one big mega factory that will not only complete the entire technology tree, so everything we still have to unlock, including all of these futuristic upgrades, and that actually taps into every single resource on the entire map, just making sure that I can actually say I completed the game. So, TDA from the future, as I'm editing this episode, this challenge got kind of out of hand, so as I continued, I started making more and more complex, large builds, more and more aesthetically pleasing. Had a lot of fun with it, don't get me wrong, but you might want to stick with it to the end, because I think you will like it. Now, in order to make sure this doesn't actually take the rest of my life to complete, I made a couple of blueprints for each type of production facility that we currently have unlocked, with the max tier of buildings in that, at least the max tier that I currently have unlocked. And considering I haven't actually used any of the more aesthetic things in the game, I figured I might as well include some of these. So if you're wondering what all of just junk is, it's the aesthetics that you can actually unlock. And I figured if I'm not going to use them now, I'm probably not going to use them ever. The extractor upgrade is good to go, and that means that I can now select everything I've actually created on this map, all 23,000 buildings, and press delete. Are you sure? Well, not really, but let's do it anyway. Now, the good news is I have about 2 million gold. The bad news is I have 0 income. So we definitely need to go and fix that first, because otherwise I won't be able to build my factory. Now, I actually think I had the correct idea initially to build my factory in this area of the map, or maybe this area of the map, mainly because that seems to be the biggest open space. Ideally, I would have liked my facility to be in the center, but honestly, this is probably the biggest area that we have available there, and I don't think that's going to cut it. So I'm going to build my facility right over here, and we're going to start with building a lot of gear production, because I need to produce about 450,000 of those in order to complete all the remaining speed upgrades for my belts. And the nice thing about gears is that actually you can use 2 full belts, and currently my belts carry 300 items per minute, to turn those into exactly 1 full belt of gears. So far, so good. Now, taking gear production into the next gear means that I'm producing 1200 gears per minute in order to actually make sure I'm getting through this part of the technology tree as fast as possible, because faster belts just means easier production. Now, it also means I actually had a use for these gear statues, so I don't expect these to live for very long, but at least it's a very decent way to start producing. Now, this actually turns our factory into something that's fairly simplistic, but it kind of looks impressive to begin with, so I like this as a start of a mega factory. The gears are not actually going to help me progress down the technology tree, because I'm going to need to discover microscopes in order to do that, and in order to discover those, I'm going to have to produce some nanowires. So I generally think it's helpful to kind of visualize what you're trying to build in order to basically plan ahead your next section of your mega factory. So I'm gonna need nanowiring in order to produce that. I need carbon fiber and glass. Glass needs sand, and the carbon fiber needs graphite. So all in all, this is a pretty straightforward production. The nice thing is none of this actually needs the iron that I'm using here. So I can bring in some new resources and basically set up the supply line for my major factory without having to fiddle around with the one I already have. There we go, a nice little optimized nanofiber production facility. And, well, of course, I'm going to need to actually fill it with resources, but other than that, I do think it looks really nice and organized. I actually have to admit that using the aesthetics options in the game does give your factory a lot more character than it would have without this. There we go, everything is up and running, and it's going to take a minute for me to actually produce all the nanofiber I need, but luckily we have something to spend the time on. Because as it turns out, I'm actually going to need a lot of concrete as well. I deleted all my concrete production, and it's something I already have unlocked, However, I need 4,000 of these in order to unlock the last upgrade for my underground belts, so might as well start working on it while we have to wait for something else. As a side note, my OCD is really happy about how this factory is turning out so far. It's actually turning into something that looks like a mega factory already, and we've barely even started. Would you look at this beautiful design? This is only going to generate about 30 concrete per minute. We don't need a lot of that because I only need it for that specific technology. But I really like the layout, and I actually took the time to refine some of the belts and put in some additional stuff, and honestly there's a very good reason to do that, because as you can see, it completely broke, and it actually takes forever for the resources to get there, because actually I'm getting quite a bit into actually mining the entire world. Well, no, it's about a quarter, so pretty long way to go, but still, yeah. Basically, this corner of the world has already been mined, with the exception of some of the more rare resources that we currently don't have access to yet. But having access to microscopes and unlocking condenser lenses and electron microscopes does mean we're going to be able to solve the unmined resource problem really quick, because next on the list is tungsten production, which apparently we make from wolframite. And there's probably someone in the comments who's going to explain to me why we're calling the raw resource wolframite and then the actual steel type thingy tungsten. Anyway, also quite quickly after that we're going to get uranium extractors and enriched uranium, so that's pretty much going to cover, I think, all the remaining resources on the map. At least we'll be able to mine them. And there we go, we have a full belt of wolframite on its way to the actual research center. And speaking of research centers, look at this beautiful concrete factory working with these 6 belts coming in, going into this single research lab making concrete. But yeah, speaking of research labs, we can actually only build 3 of those. I have one over here, I have a second one over here that's mostly being used for the nanowires. And then I have another one over here that I actually do need for the gears. So I'm not going to touch this one because we're still working on the belt speed. We're up to 375 per minute at this moment, but I still need something like 200,000, actually 300,000 more of these. So we're not going to touch this anytime soon. But we might need to think about the nanowire setup anyway. But for now, I can fit this in through the back door. So we're working towards wolframite. And actually, right now, even though I have the microscopes unlocked, I don't have anything to do with them. So right now, I can just focus on kind of expanding into the late game stuff. We also unlocked apparently the new robotic arms, so let's unlock those. And we do have upgraded furnaces, which just means we need even less of those, because this is one of the most efficient buildings in the game already. Still, just to be prepared, I just made a manufacturer layout, because that's where the electron microscopes are actually being made, 300 each. But it actually doesn't gain us any money because these components are actually slightly more expensive. But anyway, 4 inputs, so this is going to be really exciting later on. But first things first, let's make some tungsten. So the good news is we have some tungsten carbonate production right up and running here. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward so far. However, I keep running out of money, and as you can see, actually the builds here are not full. That's because the extractors aren't actually fully upgraded yet, because again, I keep running out of money. So we have to fix that before I can continue on. There you go, a pure money farm. Now, actually, in hindsight, I'm not entirely sure if it makes a lot of sense to build this in this stage of the game. But this is definitely, if you want to build your own mega factory, you should do this as early as you can. Just make sure you build all the gold vaults and all the research centers that you can. Make sure you fill up as many belts as you can with processed resources, not raw resources. Those don't actually count. You do need to at least make them into planks or ingots or whatever. And then just start feeding them into these buildings. Just make sure you basically procure as much gold as you can as early as you can, because it actually takes quite a while for all this production to earn itself back as well. Once it does, it's extra money, but it does take a little bit of time to turn up. Also, don't forget that initially, if you want to do something like this, you can just start with tier 1 buildings and then just upgrade them as you have money available. Now, the way that I've built them over here is, as you could see just now, these belts are not saturated at all. That's because I haven't actually upgraded everything just yet. But I have put in place enough buildings to make sure that once I do, these buildings should still keep producing and these belts should fill up. Now, another way to get a little bit less broke is probably by mining some uranium. So let's go and do that as well. Actually, we have something else that we can unlock. It's the turbocharger, which we can use to build a coupler and a turbocharger. That's interesting. So let's unlock that as well. Why isn't this unlocking? Because apparently I need steel. So we need to go and fix that as well. What else do we need? We need some carbon fiber. I actually have been working on that already. I'll show you in a moment. We need a coupler for this, just making sure I didn't miss anything else. Now, to fill in some of those gaps, I can just use the carbon fiber that I'm already producing in the nanowire production. That of course means I'm going to produce less nanowire, but that's not really a problem because I can just feed in the secondary resources into the main line as well. This is still actually going to give me the exact same amount of money as it did before. It's just not going to be producing just one type of thing. Similarly, here in the steel, the concrete resource, actually I do sub-optimize my production right now because I do need a little bit of steel to unlock one type of resource as well. So we're just going to have to make do with a little less concrete for the moment. So the thing with this uranium extractor is that it is super expensive. And it also doesn't necessarily produce a lot of items per minute, and you can't even upgrade it. You also need quite a lot of it in order to make some enriched uranium so you can actually sell it, but it sells for a lot of gold. Now, keeping in mind that the production is really slow, you actually do have to set it up. Again, it does take a little while for itself to earn itself back, but I do think once we have this up and running, it should give us a pretty steady flow of income. And unlike the other gold facility that I just built, this is going to produce at such a slow rate that there's going to be zero issues getting it on a belt towards either a research center or a gold vault. And I actually think you can probably fit all the uranium locations on a single belt and turn them into enriched uranium really easily, assuming you have the gold to do so. Seems like I was right, we can actually fit all the uranium on the entire map on a single belt, and it might not look like much, but each of these blobs is actually worth 1,000 gold. So every now and then someone comes in, one of those comes in, and this jumps up straight away. As you can see, building the uranium production is actually really expensive. Actually, it took me some while as well, but I think it's going to be worth the investment because every single extractor actually produces over 300 gold per minute, and I have quite a few of those now. Because like I said, I have mined every single uranium deposit on the map. Okay, just a slight problem though. In order to actually use some of that enriched uranium, I'm going to need steel to unlock the nuclear power. I'm also actually going to need steel to unlock the manufacturer upgrade. So, I have a steel production, I just didn't divert it early enough. That's something we can easily fix though, because I just removed the concrete production over here in the top end of that build, and I'm just feeding in the sand as well as the steel into the research lab now. So we're actually producing some steel, we're not letting the sand go to waste. I'm not going to take down this production facility just yet, because I do actually need concrete for one of the other technologies down the line as well. And for those of you typing in the comments, yes, it does help if you actually remove the steel rod production and feed in the actual steel into the research lab, because otherwise it's not going to do anything that I want. Now, while we're waiting for that, we're going to work on building some couplers and turbochargers. Getting the coupler production up and running is really straightforward because you can just make them from a 1-to-1 ratio from the carbide that we already have in production. However, the turbochargers are going to be a little bit more work because we need gears, circuits, nanowires, and couplers in order to make these. Putting all of that in a more simplified layout, it looks something like this, with each building representing a single type of production chain. Putting all of that into a functional build looks something like this, and I really like this build. I'm using the incoming belts as a bottleneck, so just maxing out one of the belts in such a way that I can make sure that I only need one belt of each resources. And as you can see, for example, copper and iron are not used that much in this particular build, so I'm not producing too much of those on those belts, but some of the other belts are actually completely full. I really like all the straight lines in this build, all the interconnectiveness and the efficient way of actually producing resources here. There's a sushi belt in the end that actually connects to the output belt as well, so even though we are mainly trying to produce the turbochargers here, I might be slightly overproducing something because it's pretty much impossible to actually get perfect ratios going. So as you can see, every now and then there might be an item slipping through. That's not a problem. There's actually quite a lot, but usually it's less than that. And this just makes sure that this belt doesn't back up. And here I've made a similar build, but now to produce computers, something we've unlocked ages ago, but I actually need that to unlock supercomputers. Strangely enough, for the last few upgrades, or at least some of the last few upgrades, I actually need some very basic builds. So I need the rotors, I need concrete, I need metal frames, and I need tungsten. The concrete and tungsten we already have, but I do need a build for the metal frames and rotors. So I decided to make a small build for rotors over here and restore the previous, where is it? Yeah, there we go, the concrete build back in its former glory, so it's actually producing concrete once again. And then what else do we need? Well, we need the tungsten, but we are already producing that. And we also need metal frames, as I said before, but we can probably get that temporarily from one of our other builds. So that means the supercomputers are up next. So for the supercomputers, I decided to be a little bit lazy because I'm already producing computers, turbochargers, and couplers on an output belt. So I only needed to add in the heat sinks and I'm good to go. Now the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to have to redesign this entire facility. It's starting to look really good though, but I'm going to have to redesign the entire facility because we're getting near the end and we're going to be unlocking some of the end tier upgrades or production items, and that's just going to make everything we've done so far kind of obsolete. To speed things up a little, I actually decided to double the production of the turbochargers because I need so many of those. And in the meanwhile, I did complete the research for a stabilizer, and this is something that is actually used in pretty much all of the endgame recipes. Speaking of endgame, there's good news and there's sort of bad news that's also good. I don't know. I'm about to unlock several upgrades for all the buildings that I'm using. We're about to upgrade several new items as well that all lead to the endgame, which is the Earth token. This is where apparently we send tokens back to Earth, and that's kind of the point of this game, of course. And we're also going to be able to upgrade our belts a lot with that. Now, what's the problem? The facility I've built so far is kind of modular. It's also built to the extent that I tuned it to the belt speed I had at the time, the production speeds I had at the time, and I'm also producing quite a few things that I no longer need. Well, I do need those items, I just don't need them to be produced by themselves. So, I could of course just patch all of that together and similarly like I've done over here, just leads that off the belt and it just kind of go with the flow. But honestly, that kind of looks messy and I don't do messy. So what I want to do is actually kind of rebuild the entire factory, but basically aimed at the end game now. So taking into account the end game speeds, the end game belts, and make one large facility that is completely tuned to the end products. Oh dear lord, what did I get myself into? I'm trying to make a facility that's going to produce some atomic locators from base resources. This is my starting point, and I'm going to need to add in 28 different types of resources to be produced along with the facilities in order to do that. And then all the belts actually need to line up, they need to combine in the proper ways, the resources need to be redistributed. This is going to take a while. And by a while I mean hours, but I think I figured it out. This should be producing 4 atomic locators per minute, assuming I didn't make a single mistake while building this. So let's hook it up and find out. There we go, look at this humming along, and I know it's hard to see because actually putting the entire factory, this part of the factory on a single screen doesn't work that well, but I have this whole sushi belt going on here in the middle. As you can see, there's not that many resources actually leaving at the end of that sushi belt because everything is actually being used, or at least most of it is actually being used in the factory itself. Now, the reason that not everything is being used is partially because I might need to do some rebalancing, but it's also partially because I haven't actually fully upgraded everything yet because I still need to do some technology to unlock some things. Now, that is hopefully going to sort itself out, but for now this is chugging along just fine, and we're getting some atomic locators up and running. I am getting very close to the bottom of the technology tree here, but the next thing on the list is the industrial frames. And actually I should probably have built this before I did the atomic locators, simply because I need quite a few of these things and they're actually pretty expensive to produce. However, the build for that is actually not that large compared to its larger neighbor that we just built. And that's actually including a build for batteries, because in the technology tree, the next thing I'm going to unlock is the energy cube, which actually needs both batteries and industrial frames. So previewing this recipe, I already built this 2 ratio, so all I need to do once I actually unlock the energy cubes is add in the building in the open spot over here, and then we're good to go. And that brings me to the last 2 builds, namely for the quantum entangler as well as the particle glue, because I planned ahead. I'll show you why in a moment, but for now let's start with the quantum entanglers. In the build so far, I've been working backwards from the end product, but I want to try to see what happens when I start with the baseline instead. And there you go. I have to say I'm not disappointed about the end result. Now, I do have to admit that if you think that this looks really neat and organized, I mean, it's not that bad, but the neat little rows of trees are hiding a lot of belt spaghetti. If I zoom in a little bit here and there, you can see that there's a lot of crisscrossing belt. Part of the reason that this is happening is that there's a lot of one-off buildings. So if you have neat little rows of several buildings, it automatically looks more organized, even though it isn't necessarily more organized, it just looks like that because you have multiples of buildings. And the belt spaghetti is kind of the result of me building a closed system. So there's no resources leaving this system except for the end product. If you compare it to the previous build where we have this sushi belt, so you can see there is a bit of overflow here happening. There's a reason for that because this system isn't actually completely balanced just yet, especially the manufacturers still need to be upgraded to the next tier and they haven't had access to that technology just yet. If you compare it, for example, to this build over here, I do have a sushi belt here as well, although it's a little less excessive, and there's no resources escaping this system except for the end product as well. So this is perfectly balanced. You can do that with a sushi belt as well. It's just a lot easier to kind of safeguard yourself against getting something wrong along the way by building a closed system. So just a couple of examples, you pick whatever you prefer. Okay, so we're in the final stretch really now because there's only one large build we still need to make, and that is the one for the particle glue. However, when I say large, I do mean large, because if I look at the amount of resources based on the math I just did that we're going to need, I think we can summarize by the rest of the map. Yes, I'm not kidding. Even though we've kind of tapped onto about 1/3 of the map now, maybe not even that, we're going to need an insane amount of resources for the particle glue. And just to give you a feel of the scope of what we're about to do, I need all of these belts of resources in order to fuel this single project. This is going to actually give us 16,000, over 16,000 resources per minute just to go into this next build. Ta-da! We have a steady production of particle glue, and it's actually going to be about 100 per minute as soon as we actually upgrade the last few things, because this is kind of suffering from the fact that we don't currently have all the extractor as well as belt upgrades, because we actually need the earth transporter technology in order to get those. But other than that, I think this is probably the best build I've made so far, which is kind of fitting because it's the last large one. And as you can see, it's huge. This thing is almost as large as the other three combined. And again, there's a ton of resources coming in here. There's a lot of interesting things going on here as well, because I have all these full belts, and we don't always need a full belt of resources per section. I have all these things here where the belts are kind of communicating with each other, so in case one of the belts is a little bit overflowing, then it can spit its remaining resources onto the other belts, and it kind of balances itself out like this. I have that going on not just in the input side, but also at some of the output sides. For example, over here you can see the same thing happening with the copper wire. All in all, it's happening in a lot of places. You can also see some of these belts are getting really full, but again, that's because the belt speed isn't quite there. And that means not every resource is currently being used. And this has been running for a little while, so you can see where things are backing up as a result of that. Now, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, because, well, this will sort itself out in time. What is a bad thing is that just as I thought I was done, I actually discovered I made a mistake. It's not something we can fix, but it's going to be really annoying, because the mistake I made is that I actually calculated the output of the machine shops tier 4 wrong. I set it to 400% in my calculations, which it is not, as you can see. So as a result, and that's I think a large part of the explanation why I have this whole overflow on my sushi belt over here, is that I'm underproducing some of the resources, and because of that some of the other resources are not being used because we're lacking a component. Specifically over here, we seem to be lacking nanowires because we're not producing enough of those, which means the other things are stuck on the belt, and so on, because the nanowires are actually not only used here, they're already sucked off the belt over here for the turbochargers, so the microscopes are actually not being made at all, which means all the other resources are just on the belt flowing into the research lab over there. So, fun thing, I get to fix this entire build. And there we go. As you can see, there's a lot less surplus of resources leaving the belt here now, and that is because, well, I added in a few of these machine shops here and there. I didn't actually have to change all that much, although the logistics involved in actually hooking everything up again was a little bit complex. But in some cases, because I needed like 2.5 machine shops anyway, I already had 3, so then the ratios didn't actually mess things up, so I didn't actually have to add anything. However, I did actually have to add in, I think, 4 or 5 of these in this build. I also had to add in a few in the previous builds, so all in all, looks pretty much the same, just making sure that it's actually optimized, and these cluttered belts should fix them themselves pretty soon. With those fixes in place, we can now focus on produce matter duplication, or matter duplicators, I should say, and that happens to be produced in exactly the ratios that my last 4 builds have been aimed at. So that makes things very easy, because all I need to do is hook up the belts from the different builds, the 4 builds to be exact, and then put in a manufacturer that actually uses all of that, gets it off the belt, and produces the matter duplicators. Now this is only going to produce 1 matter duplicator per minute. So yes, all of this is meant to produce 1 matter duplicator per minute, but we only need a couple of those, about 10 I believe. Yeah, and then we have unlocked the Earth token. So what am I going to do while I wait for the matter duplicators to actually produce? Well, the challenge was to drill into every single resource on the planet, and although I did most of that, I didn't completely do that. So there we go, every single resource on the map is now tapped into. Now it's a little hard to see, but yes, I did actually tap into every resource, and what I'm doing with that resource, well, I actually just duplicated our facility once more. This is not completely functional because honestly I have not enough wood on my planet to actually make use of all these forges that are making graphite. So that's pretty much the bottleneck, although I am also a little bit low on some of the other resources to basically replicate the entire facility once more. But this should be facilitating some production towards the endgame products as well. Now, of course, I also need a little bit of a uranium factory because, well, we have uranium. I'm not actually using that. The reason for that is quite simple. This is all the uranium coming in on this belt that I have on the entire planet. I mentioned this before, I think. And honestly, just to power up these nuclear plants, they are really expensive. As you can see, they cover a decent area, but I won't be able to field more than about 15 to 20 of these, and that sounds like a lot, but if you have to cover an entire area like this, you won't actually make it, and just powering the area itself is not enough. You also need to make sure you have enough resources coming in order to actually process all of that stuff, which is basically what I'm doing over here now anyway. So I'm not a huge fan of how the energy works or the power works in this game. Now, there's one solution to that. If we were able to kind of like build a little energy station like this over here, for example, and then just plug the power into everything using, for example, power lines, now that would be really cool. So, developers, if you're listening, if you're still here, that would be a very good addition to the game, I think. Anyway, yeah. With the Earth tokens now in production, I actually unlocked the next extractor upgrade, so now I can go around the planet and upgrade every single extractor in the world, which apparently is 1861 of them. That would cost me 37 million to upgrade all of them in one go. I don't have that kind of money just yet. It's also actually going to cost me hours upon hours to actually get the 500 Earth tokens I need for the Earth statue, which is by far the most expensive technology in the game, and I really don't want to sit around just waiting for that. So I declare this challenge completed. I'm really happy actually with how this factory turned out. It looks so cool, all these resources coming in. 1861 tier 4 extractors working at full speed. As you can see, all these belts are moving. It's nicely balanced, all of this. Not everything is exactly balanced just yet because I do need those belt upgrades and those extractors to actually have this completely functional, but it's close enough for now. So I'm gonna call it here. I hope you enjoyed this. This took me about, I think, 20 plus hours to do, and I was expecting it to take like 5, so I kind of underestimated that, but that'll teach me for underestimating a factory game. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.